Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on backup solutions and on how to decide for the most relevant one for your own purposes. My name is Jean-Jérôme. I'm with the Severalnines team, and I'll be your host today for this session. If you have any questions for the next hour on the technical side, feel free to ask me those questions in the chat box or in the question section of your control panel. And I'll do my best to answer them there and then. I'm joined today by my colleague Krzysztof, who's going to be presenting on this topic today. And before we get started, just a couple more points. Just to let you know that the session is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available within the next couple of days, so you can review the information here at your own leisure. We'll also make the slides available, so you can read through the information in your own time. But it's great to have you with us today for this live session, where you can ask questions all along for the next 60 minutes, and we'll answer them as we go along as well. And there'll be some time actually at the end of the webinar for questions specifically. Just before we get started, I wanted to ask all of you a quick question, just to give us an idea of what databases you're currently using yourselves that you would need a backup solution for. So whether it's MySQL in the broader sense or NDB MySQL cluster, maybe you have MariaDB, and then different Galera cluster versions as well. So it'd be interesting to know which ones you're using. So just give it a few seconds for everyone to place their votes. Thanks very much for participating. I close the poll now and share the results. Great. So it's actually a pretty clear split between MySQL, MariaDB, Galera cluster. That's kind of a nice mix to see. And then there's a lot of NDB cluster as well. We had the same session earlier today for our European friends. And there was less NDB cluster, so it's interesting to see. It's slightly different for this session now. So that's an interesting mix of answers. Any comments from you, Krzysztof, before you take over?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of options to choose when you decide to work with MySQL. So yeah, I'm not somewhat surprised that there are multiple the users use multiple tools, multiple flavors of MySQL. And actually, most of them we will cover during this webinar, so I think everyone should benefit.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thanks very much, and I'll hand over to you now, Krzysztof.
Okay, thank you, JJ. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krzysztof Książek, and I'd like to talk with you a bit about how to design a backup solution for your MySQL databases. For starters, I'd like to apologize for any background noise which may happen, because I was forced to take this webinar in a public place, so there may be some noise, but I hope it won't be a problem. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to talk a bit about the series of the blog posts that we are doing, and the series of the webinars that will be following up them, becoming MySQL DBA. So I mean, the whole idea of those blogs and those webinars will be to help any non-DBA people, like developers or DevOps, who are asked whose responsibility is to take care of the MySQL infrastructure. So we'll try to discuss the most common activities that MySQL DBA has to perform. We will try to share some tips and good practices about them. And in the April, if you've missed it, we encourage to take a look at the replay of the deep dive into how to monitor Galera cluster webinar, where we discussed signing of the monitoring and trending process for your Galera instance. So at the bottom of the screen and in the slides that you will get after this webinar, you will see you will have the link to that replay. Okay, and today we will discuss different what kind of backup types we can have in MySQL world. We will talk a bit about tools that can be used to take the backups and to design the backup process. We will discuss a bit how the backups are done in the cluster control, and then we plan to share some good practices and tips in designing the backup process for your MySQL environment. And last but not least, we will go over a couple of example setups, setups of backups in different types of environments, in the hope that you may find them, useful as a basis for your own backup system. So in general, we have two types of the backup. We have a logical backup, which tends to be, it's usually taken as a SQL backup in SQL form. And also we have physical backups, which basically they are bit by bit copy of the data set that was that you have in your database. So let's go into a little bit details regarding logical backups. So as I mentioned, the most common feature of the logical backups is that they generate a plain text file with some data. It's either SQL format, it could be a comma-separated value, it could be tab separated, but in general, it's just a plain text which with some letters in it that's forming SQL or something else. You tend to use SQL command to load the data. So, for example, you can have a file with insert into queries. You can use load data in file to load, for example, a comma separated value file. But in general, you just use SQL for that. Logical backups, they give you, because of their format, yes, because this is the plain text format, they give you the ability to recover even a single row, because you just have to, all of the data is there, you just need to find it in the file and then load it one way or another, depending on the file format. And sorry, and what's very important is that the logical backups are the must-have for a major version upgrades. So, if you are, let's say, if you're upgrading small, the third digit, like 5.6 to 0.10 to 5.6.20, for example, you are kind of okay by just switching binaries and then eventually running MySQL upgrade script. But if you plan to upgrade from, let's say, MySQL 5.5 to 5.6, then the only, the recommended way is to basically dump the 5.5 into a SQL file and then load it back into 5.6. It is because in this way we eliminate any possible binary mismatches changes that may happen on the binary level in the format, in the columns, something like that. It happened in the past that basically simple upgrade from one major version to another caused significant issues. So you just have to dump and reload it. MySQL dump. Well, yeah, that's I think the most the best known tool for backup tool for MySQL. It has ability to dump tables and schemas. It has ability to recover even a single row, which is easier if you disable the extended insert option, which is by default enabled. If you disable it, then you will see in the SQL file, you will see that each row is a separate insert which slows things down in terms of the loading, but it makes things much easier in terms of finding the given row and then just inserting it back into the database. MySQL dump definitely is affected by locking, but it's not really that big problem as people tend to think, because I mean, especially of course, if you're running InnoDB only, that's why I mean it's because there is an option in MySQL dump that's called single transaction, and where if you use it, MySQL dump will rely on InnoDB's transaction separation rather than locking the database to get the consistent snapshot, to get the consistent backup of the database. So if you don't have InnoDB, if you have other tables than InnoDB, then well, the problem is that you probably have to lock the whole database. But if you're InnoDB only, you should be just fine. MySQL dump tends to generate large SQL files. Especially, I mean, of course, it depends on your dataset size. But yeah, those files are large. So it's somewhat, I mean, we would suggest, and it's somewhat recommended. Well, maybe it's not a recommendation, but it's a good practice to dump separate tables into separate files, not in one huge SQL file. It's because eventually you may want to, find this one particular row and insert it into the database, the row that was deleted by accident by someone, and then it's much easier for you to parse 100 files, each 1 GB in size, than to parse one file with the size of 100 GB. It's just a matter of smaller files being more convenient to work with. MySQL dump can be used to build a slave. There is an option called master data, which basically it results in change master to command being added to the backup file. So you can pretty simple build the slave using the MySQL dump. The problem is that the recovery time is slow. I mean, the time to load the data into the database is really long. I mean, it's somewhat obvious because there is plenty of SQL to parse, and then there are some DB limitations, and in general MySQL limitations, performance limitations. So yeah, this is a slow process, and it's what's making it even worse is that the MySQL dump is single-threaded. So although you can you can create somewhat a workaround around this, because you can, let's say if you dump those data on per table basis, then you can put together a script that will basically load multiple SQL files, multiple tables at once. It's somewhat helps things up, speed things up, especially if if those tables are more or less in the same size. When you're using MySQL dump, you need to keep in mind that character set may be tricky. I mean, if you're using UTF-8 or if you're using a Latin one, you probably don't have to care about it too much. But if you have some kind of weird, local characters, national characters, and you use some kind of different character set, then you need to keep in mind that in MySQL, character sets are defined on so many levels. I mean, there's a column level, there's a table level. You can define the character set on on the schema level, on the server level, and even on the client level, and sometimes even the local settings in your operating system where you are dumping and loading data may affect it somehow. So this is really tricky, and you definitely should keep it in mind and do some additional tests if you know that you have some kind of weird not that common character sets in your database. And yeah, the recovery time is indeed very slow. So that's basically the major problem with MySQL dump.